So welcome everyone. Thanks for having me at NDC. I'm Ben Cull. I'm down here in Melbourne, Australia. It's 7:40 p.m., so I can crack a beer at any point during this talk. But today I'm talking about this startup life, and effectively, I've been running my payments company Pinch for 3 years now, and I've gathered up a whole bunch of information which I really would have wanted myself. When I started running this business. And so what this talk is kind of the retrospective from 3 years in. We're going to take a look at the journey kind of I've taken, and sprinkled throughout, I'm going to be talking about all the various bits and pieces that I have come across, like tips and tricks and bits of advice and things I wish I'd known and things I'd do differently. And so there's a ton of content we're going to get through. So I'm going to run through a whole bunch of things, but to get started, let's just make sure this is working. There we go. I'm going to get started with 2 key spoilers. Okay, so if I learned nothing else throughout this whole entire experience, these are the 2 key things I would have wanted to know. And they're the kind of things I want you to be thinking about as you apply this to kind of yourself. If you're thinking about starting a business, or you're running a business, or just have a cool side project you want to take to the next level. And the first key spoiler is that everyone's journey is different. Okay, so everyone has different starting points, skills, resources, money, everything. Everyone's situation is different. And so the path that you take is going to be very different to the person sitting next to you, or in this case, the person in your little WebEx window next to you. And so what I want you to do is thinking about my story and my journey, kind of, you can't copy people, so take away the key points, but make sure you apply it to your own situation and your own circumstances. But the thing I do think is universally true is that it's all about people. And in every single one of the talks I've given since running a startup or running a business, it's that everything comes down to people. Your customers, you need to build relationships with, your colleagues, partners, investors, serve industry people, lawyers, accountants, all these kind of things you need to build relationships with. And to be successful, you've got to build those relationships well. And so I think it all comes down to people. But before we get too far into this presentation, I thought I'd just introduce myself. I've just realized I'm wearing the same clothes I am in that photo. But my name is Ben Who Likes Beer. You can find me on Twitter under that handle, also known as Ben Cull. But I like to go by Ben Who Likes Beer. And for a bit of background on kind of my development experience, or kind of my career trajectory, I was a full-time .NET developer for 4 years. Once I finished university, I then moved on to being a .NET consultant for another 4 years. And for the most recent 3 years, I've been a startup guy, basically been running this payments company, and just trying to figure out this whole business thing. But if there's 3 things you need to know about me, it's that I love payments, I love web development, and I love beer. And I always try to wrap those 3 things up into any talk I give or any venture I go on. And I think I've managed to do that with Pinch, which is the company we're talking about today. That's the company I founded with a co-founder in Brisbane, Australia. And it's the journey of running this company from nothing to where we are now that I wanted to kind of get across today, and all the various learnings I've had. And to put all of that into perspective, it's probably best to take a look at where I am right now, so that you can look back on the journey I've taken and get some perspective on that kind of thing. So to start with, it doesn't particularly matter what Pinch does, but I will tell you just briefly, we're a payments gateway for online accounting platforms. So if you've heard of Xero or QuickBooks or any other online accounting platform, if you create an invoice, we're the Pay Now button on that invoice. And so what we do is we kind of automate that process as well by capturing credit cards and bank account information up front. And then when we see an invoice, we'll automatically execute a payment for that customer for that invoice when it's due. But the specifics aren't really important, kind of just the industry and stuff is. And so I'm really excited to tell you that we're currently earning about $30,000 Australian per month, which sounds like a huge amount of money, or at least it does to me. until you realize that it costs way more than $30,000 to run this company. And so we're still not in the positives. But it's always exciting to go back and think about kind of when I first started, with all my other side projects, this kind of revenue would be like mind blowing. But then as companies scale, so do costs, which is unfortunate, but that's where we are. But luckily, to help with this, we also have recently, like really recently, just in May, earned a seed round, landed a seed round of 720,000 Australian dollars, which I know is only like about 200 euro, but it's a big amount of money for me. And so I'm super proud to have earned this money, especially during this kind of COVID pandemic. It's not the greatest time to be raising money. But another reason I'm especially proud and pretty excited is that we've also just hired our 5th employee. And that the reason I'm so excited about this specific one is because it's really the first employee we've hired properly. It's not someone we've worked with and then maybe contracted and then they've eventually come to work for us or anything like that. This is the first time we had a need, and that need is customer service. And we had a job description and we went and found someone, and then we gave them an employment contract and then basically hired them on a salary. So that's super exciting. But you've got to recognize and realize that this also took 3 years to achieve. And so for some people, that's a really long time to be only at this position. I'm actually really proud of where we're at. I think it's a great achievement, but it definitely takes a lot longer than I thought. That's probably one of the key lessons I learned. Well, I'm still learning that every team takes forever to get done. And so, yeah, this at the bottom there, you can see our revenue over those 3 years. I've removed the numbers, but you can kind of extrapolate where we sat. And the reason for that purple arrow is because I've actually given a talk like this a couple of times. And the most recent one was probably a good 2 years ago now. And that purple arrow, that June 2018, was the highest month on my revenue chart on my prior talk. So I thought it'd be neat to just kind of show you the perspective of where we were and where we are. And I'll post a link in the chat afterwards to those kind of first talks. I think it was an NDC. It might have even been Oslo back in the day, but it was a while ago now. But given that 3 years of journey, what I've done is I've broken down this talk into 3 kind of key sections, because I love breaking things down into 3s. Now, obviously, not all of this was necessarily done in this order. For example, year 2, building your product. Oh, no. I'm a developer. I built my product way before I thought about the rest of all this stuff. But I think this is a really good way that I would break it up now as to how I would design my new company and my new product and stuff like that. So in year 1, kind of the beginnings of things, you want to know, how do you land on an idea? What business models should I be considering, and what's appropriate for me? And how do I transition from a full-time developer into a startup company effectively? How do I move my time from one to the other? In year 2, I'm going to be taking a look at building the product, some of the quirks around building software, especially in a startup fashion, and how it's different to kind of full-time development. Early execution of feedback is very important, so working with customers. And then surprisingly, dealing with feelings, because startups are a bit crazy. There's a lot of things you're doing new for the first time, and that can be frustrating. So dealing with your emotion is important. And finally, towards the end, I've got just a few things on marketing and growth and attracting investment. I'm only putting that in because I literally just did it. So it's all fresh in my head at the moment, that kind of stuff. There's just a little bit at the end there to help you along. That's mainly for people that have been doing this for a little bit. But that's the journey. And so why don't I now take you back into the story? So at the very beginning, just out of university, I went and worked for a company, landed my first job at a company that was a payments company, so very similar to what I'm doing now, intent, that I really enjoyed working for. I learned a lot from them, especially a lot of SQL skills, a lot of development skills. I really enjoyed working there. But it really made me fall in love with the industry as well. I kind of got to pull back the covers on the banking system and take a peek at how that all worked. And I just found it really interesting. And it was around about this time too that the company Stripe launched, and I fell in love with that company. They just seemed to nail everything payments related. They had beautiful APIs. They had a beautiful site. Their widgets looked gorgeous. Everything about them was really, really well done. And I was enamored with just everything they had. And so I wanted to kind of take that cool stuff and bring it to the company I work for. Like I wanted to improve that company I work for and make them more like Stripe. But of course, they weren't particularly interested. It wasn't really their goal. And so I had to kind of put that to rest and just go, okay, one day I'll be able to go and work for that company, or I'll be able to build that company. But I left that one alone. And I bounced around from job to job for a little while in full-time development, as a lot of people in my industry, especially in Australia, do. But eventually, kind of 4 years in, I went and landed a job at a consultancy. This consultancy is SSW. You may have heard of them. They have speakers at NDC all the time. And that was fantastic. I really, really enjoyed my time with them. And the thing that it made me kind of realize is there's a big difference between being a full-time developer for a software company and being a software consultant. The pressures are different, the industries are different. And one of the things I realized that it's actually a really good idea. This is the first tip of the talk. It's a really good idea to give consulting a try because you learn a few skills that I think are really important when it comes to trying and building a separate company or product. And a few of those benefits are you learn to sell yourself. So with consulting, you're the product. And you need to convince people that they should be paying for your product, that they should be paying for your software consulting abilities. And so you do have to, work with clients and customers to, prove your worth. You also need to manage relationships. So whereas when I was a full-time developer, you kind of only really interacted with your colleagues and maybe your bosses and some other departments. But when you're a consultant, you're working directly with the customers. So you're taking on that feedback. You're working with them to develop what it is you're doing. And you need to manage those relationships, good and bad. And part of that is being taught responsibility and accountability, because when a bug occurs, and if it's a bad bug especially, but when the customer is angry, when you're a full-time dev, a lot of the time, the customer will be calling customer support. They'll take care of it. They'll log a bug, comes into your ticket queue, you can fix it and get it out the door. Whereas in consulting, the angry customer knocks on your door and says, hey, why is this broken? And you need to then A, manage that relationship, and B, take accountability. Because if it's a bad bug, what are you going to do to fix that and make amends for that kind of thing? And finally, it really trains you to think about business needs over development needs. So again, as a full-time developer, I was kind of always thinking about, I want to make really good software because I'm good at what I do. I want to make sure that it's good features, it's polished, it looks nice, it's stable, it's tested. Whereas in consulting world, you need to balance that with what the customer wants, right? So if you want to build them a really nice administration screen, but they don't really need that, they're happy just to call you and get you to change a database field now and then you can't really just go ahead and do what you want anyway. You've got to balance what the business needs and the value they're paying for versus what you would traditionally want to do as a developer. And so what I realized is that this actually boils down into sales, communication, and business. 3 really important skill sets I think you need when you go to create your own company or product. And that just kind of magically came out of consulting. So that's why my first tip is, consider going into consulting, at least just for a little bit, give it a try. But I mean, as always, I like to jump around in my career, and the time came where I got the itch. I got the side project itch where I wanted to start a new thing, and I already had so many things on the go. I've been making side projects forever, but I wanted to start a new thing, and this was after having done consulting for a little while. And my now business partner and I, who both originally worked for that payments company, we decided to get together and make a little thing called Sky Collect, which kind of does look a little bit similar to what we're doing now, but it was our first incarnation of a product that we really wanted to get right, and we actually wanted to make money from. And so as developers do, we built it before talking to any customers or doing any kind of research or anything like that. And this is all on the side, so it's just a side project. And we built it, we tried to sell it, and we found it really difficult to sell. And so we went to a friend of ours who was an angel investor to ask for advice. And that person kind of ummed and ahed and was like, oh, I mean, it seems okay, but the market's pretty small. There's not really a lot of people that are wanting to pay for this thing. Doesn't seem like anyone can agree on how to pay for this kind of service. And all we were doing was SMS reminders for late invoices. That's all this product was. It's not really important. But it was a bit of a tangent, a very small thing. And as we were talking to this angel investor, I remembered back to those days where I was like, oh, gee, I'd really like to do that Stripe stuff. And he asked about it and was like, oh, what was that? And I described the business model, and I described how Stripe is a multi-billion-dollar company, and the company I used to work for had now grown 4 or 5 times the size and was a multi-million-dollar company. And he thought, he said, oh, why didn't you try that? Why don't you give that a go? And we were like, all right, let's maybe perhaps pivot towards something different and give that a crack. So of course, what we did then was sit down and very carefully think about our business plans and market analysis. And now we just built it. We didn't bother with any of that stuff. We just got in and built the thing. And so this is, during kind of towards the end of my consulting career, and my business partner was freelancing at the time, and we just went and started building it. But the thing with hindsight is it's at this point that we should have stopped. And this is where I want to kind of give out some advice. Here's what I should have done at that exact point instead of building it. And it's sitting there and it's thinking, how do I land on an idea? What do I choose? What do I need to know to start a startup, to start a product, a service, a company, anything like that? And so the first thing I think I would do now, if I was doing it again, is to think about the business model. The business model is one of the more important things about the company. It can tell you a lot about how it's going to work. Now, I'll just give you a few examples, but the most popular one here is obviously subscription access. Most SaaS companies are subscription-based. You pay $50 a month, you get access to the software. But there's a bunch you probably haven't thought of as well. Obviously, there's just one-off payments. Think about an ebook. Think about a mobile app where you pay once and you get access to that software, and that's it. They can be lucrative business ventures as well, and they can be good ones to start off with if you're just looking to bring some revenue in the door. My favorite example is a mate of mine from SSW, who was a dietitian before he became a software developer, had a whole bunch of cobbled together software where you filled it in a Google form and it sent it to a PDF generator. It sent basically a diet sheet off to the customer. And that was all cobbled together using no custom software, just all connected together. And that was a very viable business. He did pretty well from that. And so you don't always have to go straight into SaaS. You can also do other things. You can sell data, and I'm not talking about the evil Facebook selling their soul kind of data. You can just make the collection of data very easy and then sell the insights and results of that data onto your customers as well. And I have an example where a high-performance fitness company give out very highly accurate hardware that's expensive. They give that out for free to collect the data, and then they will charge the company only on the insights of that data. And that's just one way to go about things. And then you've got pay as you go. Now, this is what we ended up landing on. And the classic example of a pay as you go company are things like Azure or AWS, right? Where you only pay for what you use. And the problem with this kind of business model, and this should have been a red flag when we started, is that it only works when you've got an economy of scale, right? So you have to have loads of computing equipment to be able to give out tiny pieces to everyone so that they only have to pay a little bit each. You need loads of customers for that to work well. And that's one of the things we ran into as well. Our business model as a payments gateway is to take a cut of the transaction fee. Now, if we only get a very, very small fraction of that, we need loads of customers to make this work. And you need loads of volume to drive down your supplier costs. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg scenario there where you need volume to get cheaper prices, but you need cheaper prices to get volume. And so that would have been red flag number one. Second thing I want you to look at is the industry that you're thinking about getting into, because another thing I didn't think about is that you're going to be in this industry for the long term. So if you don't enjoy the industry that you're thinking about building a product or service for, you're not going to have a very good time. Now, luckily, I really love payments, so I've got at least that one ticked off. But the second thing here is that you should probably have good access to this industry as well. And for example, if I was thinking about, I don't know, a piece of software that helped movie stars find new homes, if I can't get access to the movie stars to try and sell them my product, then I'm not going to have a very good time either. And so if you have access, but if I was like a script writer or a cameraman or someone who had just slightly more access than me, they might be more successful. And so if you have a passion and access, fantastic, but that's something important to think about. And thirdly, think about your competition as well. Now, the key reason I suggest that you should think about your competition is because it can have already validated the business model. And I think that's probably the most important one here. And it's where our Sky Collect, that initial go at trying to do some stuff there, didn't work, because there wasn't very many other competitors that did what we did. And no one really charged the same way. So no one was used to paying for this service. So trying to sell something that no one's kind of already paying for or doesn't know anyone that's paying for is a really difficult challenge. Whereas if you pick a business model that exists already, and this is something we thankfully did right, there's tons of payment gateways. We just picked the same one, put our rates slightly higher because we had to, but also we added a bunch of value. And that's how we handled the second point here. Can you differentiate yourself? You know, if you've got competition, you need to be able to say why people should choose you and not just go with the existing competition. And for us, it was a bunch of accounting value add stuff, but not super important. The fact is that we looked at businesses that existed already, and hint, hint, we actually looked at a UK business that wasn't yet in Australia, and we copied their business model. So that's a neat little trick we did. But then the third thing you need to think about when you're kind of talking about competitors is, do you have sufficient resources to compete or to achieve the business that you want to do? And the way I like to think about this, and bear with me with the terrible metaphor here, but the way I like to think about this is a civilization map. I'm team red down the bottom right hand there. And up in the top left corner here is this really, really rich seam of ore in that mountain. And I know how to mine ore and I know how to sell ore. I just need to get there. And my little red army, he can't compete with all those armies in the middle there. So instead, what I should be doing is hanging out down here with the elves, making some pixie dusts and selling that. That's kind of what I have the resources and capability of achieving. Now, there's a big caveat to this because I think it's what we've also done. And that's that whilst we don't have the resources to just go straight there, we don't have millions of dollars in marketing and abilities to just go straight to this huge new market. But what we can do is we can kind of just skirt around the side and very, very slowly take our time to get there. And that's kind of what we're doing. We're a very slow and steady growth business. We're chasing a big, difficult to achieve business model, but we are getting there. And so I think, you know, it's not a hard and fast rule that if you can't get there, don't do it. But just, yeah, I would love to have been aware of all this stuff beforehand. And so if you do want to go hang out with those elves, you might be asking yourself, well, how do I take the first step? And it's at this point where I'll kind of tell you the story about how we personally went and took the first step towards building Pinch. And it was off the back of that talk with the angel investor. So when he suggested that we should consider the more lucrative business and not bother with the smaller one, we each went back home. I was visiting Australia, but I was still living in Belgium. But luckily, my business partner was actually going home back to England. He's English, back to the UK for a holiday. And we caught up there and we sat down in a gorgeous English pub in the middle of the countryside. And we thought, we should just go for this new big business. Let's have a crack. And so we started scribbling down architectures and thinking about how we were going to build this big new company. And pretty much what we did is just get super excited and go for it. And so what I did is, this is kind of towards the end of my consulting career. I went back to Belgium, Paul went back to Australia, and then we just started building it. Now, what I did is I cut back my consulting job from full-time to 3 days a week. So I had 2 days a week to work on my new business. And my business partner, what he did is he, at the time, was freelance consulting. And so he basically just tried to juggle paid work with startup work and tried to feed his family, basically. And so we were both kind of putting in the extra effort, but trying to get some daytime hours into this business, because I think that makes a world of difference. But the problem with that is, once I got a taste of doing the 2 days a week of something really exciting, I was really demoralized for working on my other consulting work. And so instead, what I ended up doing is talking to my wife, and she had a decent salary. Belgium had a low cost of living, so we effectively just let me go full time onto Pinch. My business partner was still doing half, and we just went for it. Now, the problem with that, it was all well and good for the first little while, but the problem with that is it actually took quite a while to ramp up. And so I didn't actually get paid properly for 3 years virtually. And even now, it's not great, but I am getting paid thanks to that investment. So one of the things I wanted to think about is, do you have the financial resources to do that? And can you make that long stretch, or can you slowly it, like I did in the beginning, where I took just only a couple of days off work to work on the main startup? Can you do freelance consulting and balance those kind of books? So I just wanted to throw a couple of ideas out there, because this is obviously where everyone's path is different. How do you support yourself financially whilst also migrating to this kind of business? And if you get investment straight off the bat, well, then you can just quit your job and go straight in. So that's always an option too. It's just difficult. But one of the key kind of benefits, and this is a sort of a tangent, but I think it's really important, because it benefited me once we moved back to Australia, but it's taking the time to experiment. And this isn't necessarily only good advice for people running startups and stuff like this. I think this is good advice for any developer working for any company. When you take the time to experiment, you can dive deeper into new technologies or just new ways of doing things and kind of expand your own skill set. But a really tangible kind of benefit that happened for me personally was I needed an authentication system for Pinch. So I started investigating Identity Server. Funnily enough, I watched a talk at NDC about Identity Server and got really excited and jumped into it. And I dove really deep into that topic. And I learned about how it worked, all the features it had. I built out a nice Identity Server prototype for Pinch that worked with this cool marketplace kind of authentication stuff. It's really cool. I won't get too far into it, but I really enjoy that software. But what it did do, and this is kind of by accident, is I built up a skill set around a product that was in demand in terms of consulting. There are lots of other businesses that did this kind of thing. And so by the time that my wife and I moved back to Australia, where the cost of living is suddenly back up high again, we can't just survive on one salary. What I did is I went to the first user group that existed in Newcastle, which is where we moved to. I said, hey, I'm happy to do a user group talk. I've got this great topic. I ended up getting on the next month's user group talk list, so I gave my talk. And during that talk, I talked about Identity Server, and I said, hey, by the way, this is a specialty I have now. If anyone has any consulting work, send it my way. And I actually got 2 consulting gigs off the back of that user group talk. And so getting out into the community is a great way of, again, that freelance consulting style of supporting yourself. And B, it's just a great way to get known, because I actually got a few gigs off the back of those gigs. So that's the kind of thing I would suggest doing. And it segues nicely, but it's into the just do it category of advice here. Nike got it right. A lot of people think about doing things. I'd love to, do that one day, or I'd love to go out and, move somewhere crazy or something like that. But if you just do it, you'll be surprised about what happens to you. And I have a great example, which I'll just talk about really quickly, because you might be wondering, Ben, hey, you're at a payments company. How does that actually work? Like, how do you move money from A to B? And in Australia, there's this thing called direct entry, whereby I now have the ability to reach into any bank account in Australia and pluck out as much money as I want and transfer it to myself. Now, I know that facility existed thanks to the payments company I worked for at the beginning, because they had that facility. And so I thought, okay, pinch, we're going to be a payments company. This is how we're going to start it, is with this plucking of the money facility. But I don't know how to get that. I guess I'll go to the bank. So what I did is I walked to one of the biggest banks in Australia. I walked into the city and I went to their big corporate high-rise building. I took the elevator to the 21st floor and went to reception. I said, hey, I'd like this facility, please. And they go, do you have an appointment? Yeah, they promptly sent me downstairs to the lobby, to the branch. And this was like walking into the DNB bank or something like that and demanding an important corporate facility. But no, they sent me to the branch. But what happened in that branch is I went to a teller, just one of the service people. I said, hey, I want this facility. They're like, I don't know what you're talking about. Here's my manager. Manager comes in. Oh, I don't know what you're talking about, but let me see if I can find someone. They get me a video call with someone slightly upstairs. That person says, oh, I think I know that. Let me find someone higher up that knows. Get me on a video call with them. That person says, yes, I've heard of that facility. Let me find some forms. A couple of weeks later, I just get some forms, fill them out, send them back. And I'm pretty sure that they weren't supposed to give me this facility. But just because I knew it existed, I found the right forms and I found the right everything. And then suddenly I had it. I had the ability to just pluck money from anyone. And so that's kind of off the back of that whole, like, just go do it. Just ask for what you want and see what happens, because you'll be surprised. I got back up, invited to the top floors and finally got to talk to people. And so the reason I talk about this is because if you want some tangible things that you can do right now, even without an idea or anything like that, some things you can do, and whether this is in the development industry or it's in the industry you want to move into, right? If you're interested in building health and fitness software, you could do these things in the health and fitness industry instead of the development one. But I mean, it's the same old stuff. Write some blog posts if you haven't already. Make a video, perhaps. That's always fun. Attend meetups and conferences. You've got that covered. And then eventually put on your own events, which is an interesting one, because I think once you start networking with the right people who want to kind of help you put these kind of things on, you'll find that you start to be known for certain things, and people start coming to you rather than you having to do the hard yards of going out and finding other people. Now, the second way of going about this, and I really love this strategy, is the stair-step approach to, I guess, self-financial worth, or whatever it is, like self-sustaining, being self-sustained financially. This is an approach that I found from Rob Welling, who is the founder of the Startups for the Rest of Us podcast. If you haven't been listening to that, 100% just go and listen to this guy. He's super knowledgeable. That podcast is excellent. It's aimed at non-venture capitalist funded businesses. So it's all the small guys, lots of practical advice, so many episodes, really, really fantastic. But the gist of that stair-step approach is that you start with easier to achieve successful kind of businesses. Excuse me. And so the first one, for example, here is you could start with a one-time sale product. So maybe write a WordPress plugin and just let that tick over some money, learn how to market that product, learn how to sell that product. And then you do that a few more times. Second step is get a couple more of these products under your belt. And then eventually the idea is you build up enough revenue to buy your time back. And at that point, once you bought your time back, you can go start investing your time in building a recurring revenue product. And I feel like this would probably be the way I had done it if I was doing it again now, because I've worked for free for too long. And I think if I had had at least some other sources of revenue coming in that weren't trading my time for money, that's kind of how I would go about it. So I definitely recommend looking up the stair-step approach from Rob Welling. But it's about this point of time, those are all the things I would have thought about before building my product, and I realized we're halfway in, and that's like just so important. I skipped over all of that, and have been lucky enough to kind of stumble my way towards somewhat success. I've got fingers crossed, knocking on wood, rather than trying to say we've made it yet. But the next thing that we're ready to do now is build the software. And so that's exactly what we do, what we did anyway. As developers, we just went and built the thing that we wanted to build before consulting any customers or trying anything businessy, basically. And the end result was that we built something that I wanted, but not necessarily what the customers wanted. And kind of the way that works, and I'll try to be quick about explaining this, is Pinch is actually two products. It's Pinch, the awesome Stripe-like dream payments API, but then it's also an accounting integration, right? It talks to invoicing systems. Now, we actually just built Pinch, the payments API engine first, and that was just going to be the product. And because we're developers, once we had built that, we went, how do we sell this thing? How do we test it? You know what, let's just build another thing that tests the first thing. And so we built this accounting integration. Now, the problem was that we then had to sell this thing. So how do we get that accounting integration into people's hands? Well, here's a legitimate, really useful tip, I think, that people should pick up on. Is instead of sending cold emails or cold phone calls or something like that, trying to sell this product, what we did is we actually sent out surveys. There were still cold emails for the most part, but we sent out surveys to, in our case, accountants and bookkeepers, because that's the industry we wanted to get into with our accounting integration. And we just asked their opinion. So we said, hey, we're thinking about building a piece of software that does this. That was a lie. We had already built it. You know, on a scale of 1 to 5, how does this feature, you know, how good would this feature be? Or how important is this feature to you? What about this feature? What about this feature? Do you have any problems with getting paid right now? And we just asked people's opinions on what was effectively an industry problem. And we got so many more responses back from that survey than we did from any sales stuff we had done before. And the important thing here is that we actually caught the attention of someone who, A, wanted to be a customer, but B, was in the business of kind of recommending apps. And so he got us most of our initial customer base because his job was to recommend different payment systems. He, you know, basically sold our company for us to a bunch of his colleagues and a bunch of his customers. And that's kind of how we built up the confidence there. And it was at this point when people started paying and paying and paying for the accounting integration, and my U-Butte piece of software behind the scenes, you know, amazing, immaculate, well-designed, wasn't really being used, but the accounting, slapped together accounting integration that just, we kept tacking things on, we kept working with the customers to improve it. That was selling really, really well. And so this has kind of been one of the things that we've been battling this entire time. Is I was always traditionally wanted really quality software. Co-founder just really wanted to serve the customer well. And we've been butting heads to the point where we actually just built each other's systems separately. So I built the API, he built the accounting integration. And almost to this day, we kind of still do that. And it highlights one of the important things I want to raise here is that it's not a be all and end all. I think you need to pull back your software quality thing and talk to customers more and be quicker with customer feedback. The quality doesn't always have to be immaculate. You can kind of work with them. But the key thing here is that I think you should really be working with customers as soon as you can, as early on as you can, because beautifully designed software that just isn't used isn't worth anything. And we still kind of battle on this today. So it's an ongoing struggle. Sometimes we do more quality, sometimes we rush more things. But the key thing that I kind of took away from this, and it really reminded me of way back when I worked at that payments company initially, which was, you know, I looked around and the software was really crappy at that payments company at the beginning. And I always wondered why they made so much money. And I realize now that the answer is that products don't compete, companies do. And you can have a beautiful product that is clearly better than your competitors, but if you can't sell that product well, then again, it's not really worth more than your competitors. And this is kind of at the same time why I realized back at that original payments company that 50% of the business was salespeople and the other 50% was everyone else, IT, HR, finance, yada, yada. They had such a well-oiled sales and marketing machine that that's how they dominated the market. And it didn't matter how good the other products were, they were always going to outsell you. And so to kind of sum up a couple of the key things there, it's just like you can use surveys to ask for opinions and find some early customers that way. Always be working with your customers, receiving feedback as you're building software, and always be selling, right? You can be working with customers and building exactly what they want, but if you say it's free, it's free, it's free, it's free, oh wait, now it's $10,000, this is just not going to work. You need to make sure that they're willing to pay for it at the same time. And kind of off the back of this as well, a second piece of advice for building software, especially in startup mode, is don't be afraid to make mistakes. We have made so many mistakes, it's crazy. Everything from like duplicate payments. That's an easy one. Sometimes there was a 7 duplicate payment, so it's the same payment done 7 times on the same day. There was one where the fees for a payment kept getting added on top and on top and on top and on top, to the point where many months later, the person was paying nearly 10 times what they were supposed to be paying. And in all of these cases, people got upset at the time, but there was an amazing amount of forgiveness that I never saw coming. And I think, you know, we were really embarrassed, but if you just talk to your customer, sort the problem out, I think most people just want their problem gone. They don't care too much that something went wrong. They just want things fixed. But if you support them, you talk to them, you build that relationship, and you know, just generally be positive. The amount of forgiveness that comes from customers is incredible. I thought we sank our company like 4 times already with some of the mistakes we've made. But people are surprisingly resilient, and as long as you can fix things and be positive and pleasant, it's really not. It's not been a big deal. It's certainly not as big a deal as I thought all of these problems would have been. And I think one of the takeaways I also took from this is that people really remember how you make them feel rather than specifics about you. So they may not remember an email, they may not remember a product or a feature, they may not remember even your name, but if they probably will remember, oh, I had a really good time with that person last time I met them, or oh, the software was pretty cool, like I enjoyed using it. So if you know, basically, yeah, people remember how you make them feel. And it's not just, you know, how your customers feel, it's also about how you feel, which is the best segue I have. Because startup life is crazy difficult. There's stuff going on all over the place. A lot of the time, you're doing things for the first time. And when I was just doing development, and I miss that sometimes, when I was just doing development, I'm good at that. I can do that. I know that I'm always going to have a positive outcome at the end. And I can deliver good software. Like, that's just something I'm good at. And so you never really challenge too much. Sometimes you stuff up. Sometimes, you know, there can be some politics. But for the most part, it's not too bad. But thrown into the business world, like, I didn't have any skills in any of this other stuff. So when you build something cool, but you can't sell it, that's frustrating. Or when, you know, you're really proud of something and you put it into the world and some people are like, not for me, you know, you take it to heart a lot more, even though you shouldn't. And so a lot of the frustration, you know, can come out. And in our early life, to give you kind of some high-low peaks here, when we did our first XeroCon, it was so much fun. We had so many people come to our booth. This is we exhibited at a conference. It was an accounting conference. I had cool lobster hat that I put on. I was so proud of everything. We had 100 leads come from that event. You know, a few weeks later, I won a pitch contest at QuickBooks Connect, which is another accounting conference. With like the majority of the vote, it was such a really cool experience. We had 100 leads at the first one, 90 leads at the second one. And by the end of it, though, we thought we were on top of the world, but then the weeks kind of went by afterwards, and pretty much no one signed up to our product after all that time and effort and money. Like, it cost money. We didn't have any investment or anything like that. We put our own money into exhibiting at these things, and that really, really sucked. It it was really hard to put all that effort in and have all that positive feedback, and then just have no one use your service. And I kind of freaked out a little. The low point was kind of the middle of year 2. For like 3 months, I just completely freaked out, and I wanted to stop all work. I wanted to make sure everything was planned. I wanted to do nothing unless I knew it was 100% going to be successful. And it put a real big strain, because I just complain all the time, put a big strain on my business relationship, on my personal relationship with my wife. It was really, really, really tough. Now, eventually, kind of after a little bit, I kind of, I was helped out a little, and it's super lucky because my wife actually is a psychology researcher for the University of Melbourne, and specifically researches emotions. And so I think this is the only kind of set of tips in my talk that are accredited and scientifically backed. That some of the things you can do to try and get yourself out of these holes and not take it so hard is to understand that it's okay to feel bad sometimes, but not to let it control you. Don't ruminate on bad things that have happened if you can't change them, and try to reappraise kind of the situation where you can. So if something terrible happens to you, but you can't change it, try and find the silver lining effectively, and take a different perspective on what's going on. And the thing that kind of got me out of my funk at my lowest point was being able to look back and check the growth that we had had compared to ourselves. And that's the next tip here, is compare yourself to yourself. Because if you try and look at your business and you look at all these other businesses earning more money than you, raising more money than you, being more successful than you, again, you have to walk your own path. You can't look at their situations and wish they were yours, because they might not ever have been achievable. That person may have already had money. They may have had the connections. And so you really need to compare yourself to yourself. And that's kind of what we did. Is I looked back. This was kind of in the middle of year 2 there. If you remember back to our revenue graph, we were growing fine. There was no problem. We just had a couple of hard months. And so I looked back to where we were a year before and realized we had made all these amazing achievements, really grown the business. Like, we had doubled the business. And it wasn't all doom and gloom. And I think that's really sensible, is to make sure that you look back on your own achievements and see how far you've come. And that's just the same in just personal life and professional life. Because then if you look back and you realize, I haven't really done a huge amount, maybe it's time to try something new. But again, remember that everyone has a different starting point, experience and skills. And so compare to yourself, basically. And I just want to throw in here at the end, kind of dealing with emotions side of things as well, is remote working. Everyone's kind of going through some stuff here with remote working. I've been working remotely since I moved to Belgium, so 2014, 6 years. And I don't like it personally. I miss the camaraderie of an office and a place to go and be with humans. But I'm a bit social that way, so I think a mix is good. But the one thing I wanted to kind of highlight is to watch out for your remote workers. So if you are all working together, really try and include your remote workers in what you're doing. Have social events, and COVID's actually been good for this. Kind of makes people aware that you've got to put the effort in to make sure that everyone's included, and make time for virtual socializing and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's super important. And I think we all are just going through that, and that's good. So to sum up kind of that side of things, it's okay to feel bad. Just don't ruminate. Check in with your remote people and compare yourself to yourself. Really, that's the highlighted tip here. And kind of towards the end here of our kind of trajectory and our career, I just wanted to touch on a few of the things that worked well for us. This is still hard. We're still working out sales and marketing as we go now. We're still growing, but a few of the things that have worked for us especially, and this could be just because I've got a bit more of an extroverted personality, but I really like being remarkable. Okay, you may notice that in my little name here on the video feed, it's always Ben who likes beer or something like that. If I go anywhere, I'll have that on my name tag, and it's just a way to be a little bit different and a little bit memorable. And that's where this purple cow concept came from. There's a book called that. I haven't read it, but I love the imagery, where like No one remembers a black cow or a brown cow, but everyone remembers a purple cow if they saw one. And so be remarkable. And I think that's kind of the best thing that we've done. Like I wore lobster hats at our exhibitions and stuff like that. Very outgoing, always try to be noticeable and that kind of thing. And the same, I guess the same just do it principles apply here as well when talking about growing the company and finding customers and all that kind of stuff. It just, you have to do it for the company instead of yourself. So again, blog posts, meetups, putting on events. I've now gone to a whole load of accounting industry meetups and fintech meetups, made a bunch of phone calls, which I still really, really hate. And if my co-founder's watching, he knows that I make way less phone calls than he does. But also say yes to social things. The biggest thing you can do is try to be included socially, make the effort to introduce yourself to people and try and connect, because I think, again, forming relationships and networking is easily the quickest and best way to growing a business. And that's kind of the same thing for communities as well. Go and find where your customers hang out. Find what communities they're a part of and try to support those communities. It seems pretty straightforward, but that's the idea. We try to support a bunch of the accounting industry communities, the app ecosystems in things like Xero as well. Just being present and trying to contribute to those communities has really helped, because I guess this is the case, especially in Australia, where a lot of business is done based on word of mouth and relationships. But I do know that this carries around the world as well. So find those communities. People I've found really do naturally just want to help each other. And so if you can build a relationship with people, the other thing I would suggest is act your age. And I mean that from a business perspective. Like if you're a startup and you're super young and you're super lean, admit that. Be like, hey, we've got 10 customers. Would you like to be the 11th? And you'll find that if there are the right people come to you and make the right suggestions. And we did this early on as well with some of our very first customers. We were like, we're brand new. Can you please help us out? And a lot of people did. They referred us. You know, if they thought we were a huge company, they wouldn't have bothered to refer us, but they knew we only had a handful of customers. So they put in the effort to make sure they found some more customers for us. And so be honest with your size, the size of your company and the position of your company and things like that. And I think that the community and the people you meet will be more, they'll give you more relevant reviews and grants and that kind of thing. They'll give you basically help that's more relevant. And kind of lastly, I just want to touch really quickly on the investment side of things, because you can cut out a big chunk of the financial worry if you can land some investment early on. And I know now is a terrible time for it, but as soon as the COVID stuff starts to fall away, maybe we might have a bit of a recession, but once the markets start recovering, that's going to be a perfect time to go and start raising money. And so I just wanted to touch on the one most important thing that you should be thinking about when raising money, and that's traction. Paying customers is the #1 thing people are looking for when they're looking at a business, and it's health. You can have the greatest idea in the world, but if no one's paying for it, it's not really proven. You can have a really weird idea, and if someone's paying for it, then you'll get a lot more interest in it. And one of the examples I want to give, and it's so funny. I came up with the example just because I thought, oh, okay, this will be a fun example, but I realized it's actually one of my favorite apps. So imagine, and here's an example of how traction can make a difference. Imagine there's an app, and in my case, it's a beer app, and you can download the app, and it's just going to tell you when new beers are out. And that's all it does. It's free to download. It kind of uses your location to figure out what breweries or what beers are new nearby to you, and it'll send you a little push notification, and it's free to download. If you took that and you said we have 500 customers, or 500 downloads rather, because there's no money exchanged yet, that's our app idea. And they'll be like, oh, okay, it's interesting. You've got 500 people using it. That's some traction right there. But where's the business model? But then if you said, oh, but by the way, off the back of that, when people given these push notifications for those beers, they can actually select to purchase that beer as well. And we take a clip of the ticket off the top, and we've sold 50 different cases of beer so far. They'll be like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And then if you say off the back of that, actually what we do is we find out what beers are really popular and sell well, and then we aggregate that data and feed it back to breweries who can pay for that. And we have 10 breweries paying $1,000 a month for that data. Then you're onto a winner. And I realized that is one of my favorite ads, Untapped. It's exactly kind of what happened. And I completely accidentally made up that example. But that's the power of traction, really, is the number one thing. And I will just touch on a couple of other things that you should be putting into a pitch deck. And that's traction's most important. The business model, as we discussed, really it's everything I've talked about already. But put in the business model, who you're going for, like what your target market is and why. If you've got traction, then that can kind of explain itself. Figure out how much money you need and where you're going to spend it. So is it on staff? Is it on salaries? Is it on sales and marketing? Where are you spending your money? And then figure out your cash flow. How much money do you need for how much runway? Like, when are you going to run out of cash, basically? And you should try to have at least 18 months of runway. So raise enough money to, hopefully in that time, by the time you burn away all that money, your revenues come up and you'll hit cash flow positivity, where you are earning enough profit to outweigh your costs. And again, I think if you look back at all of the things I've kind of discussed today, every one of the pieces and every one of the considerations can be improved with a relationship with your customer, with a colleague, with a business partner, with a different app, with a competitor, with the industry. It's all about building those relationships. I think that's the number one thing I can offer as advice, is just go and build some relationships. And by the way, if you follow me on Twitter, feel free to ask me anything, and you can build that relationship if you'd like. That's one of them. But yeah, build some relationships. And the last part, just to reiterate, is obviously walk your own path. This is my journey. This is where I've been, but it's due to my circumstances. And so your circumstances will be very different. So think about what I've done, take away some good bits, avoid some bad bits. And yeah, hopefully you've gotten kind of the confidence to go out and try a new thing, whether it's just writing a blog post, or it's starting a one-time product, or even if it's going out and starting a startup. I hope I've helped out at least a little bit. Thank you very much. And yeah, hit me up on Twitter or wherever you can find me. I'm happy to answer any questions I can. I'm going to exit the room though. I'll answer them just in Slack, because I know the next person coming in will probably like to get set up. But thank you. Cheers.